Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Rodriguez, and I'm here to talk to you about the election of 1828 and how it was a pivotal moment for politics and how it affects our society. Well, first of all, let's think about it. We as a society tend to always have a leader or a representative that runs things and makes the big decisions for us, and we see this everywhere in pop culture as a reflection of our reality. We see this in Star Wars, the Smurfs, and the Hunger Games, and of course, how can we forget about Game of Thrones, where everyone wants to be the king? Literally, we watch endless episodes of a show where everyone kills each other off just to be the king. And that had me thinking, about more serious and important questions such as how did Papa Smurf become the leader of the Smurfs? Did he get elected or did he kill all of his other competitors like Stalin? Well, enough of the jokes, and the real question is how was the election process created in the United States? Was it always like this? And when did the political machine that determines who the next president of the United States was formed? We just experienced an election year in 2016 where the two candidates attacked each other and tried to convince the American public that they were the best choice. Therefore, it is important to answer all of these questions to grasp a more deep understanding of how the United States elects its leaders, and at the end of this video, you will be convinced that the birth of the political machine originated with Martin Van Buren and the election of 1828. This video will prove that many of the tactics in elections today can be traced back to the election of 1828, where John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson fought for the presidency of the United States. And on that note, let us begin by explaining what exactly is a political campaign and why is it popularly called a political machine. The definition of a political campaign, according to S. H. Barnes and M. Case on their book Political Action, Mass Participation in Five Western Democracies, is an organized effort which seeks to influence the decision-making process within a specific group. Usually, these campaigns have a structure very similar to any business model, which impacts the efforts to obtain a desired outcome. In other words, a political machine is a structure of how a campaign is ran and the campaign's efforts by certain groups to convince you and me that their guy is the best choice for the job. But the question remains, have political campaigns always existed? Well, in the history of the United States, where the founding fathers frowned upon parties and called them factions that would destroy the fabric of the Union, we don't believe that the political scene was intended to have campaigns. However, the struggle for votes started as early as the 1800s, but they were very different than what we are now. According to PBS American Experience, electoral campaigns were vastly different and simple compared to today. In the 1800s, the first actual campaign between two opposite parties came to be between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, and that is John Adams Sr., not Quincy. This is where we see the invention of the smear campaign, where Jefferson paid newspapers to praise his actions and efforts for the American people and accused Adams of having a hideous hermaphroditical character. In return, Adams contracted another newspaper to call Jefferson a mean-spirited, low-lived fellow, the son of a half-breed Indian squaw, seared by a Virginia mulatto father. Whatever that means, it sounds bad, and here is where the campaign showed for the first time its ugly head. This was as far as the candidates of old extended their campaigns against their opposition. They did, however, invest in pins and other publicity that campaigns use today. All of this would come to change during the 1828 election, where it is clear that the political machine was born and campaign tactics that are considered modern came to be used. Now, in comparison with today's, those were only small actions, compared to the millions of dollars spent on ads and television by modern candidates, as well as the use of media like radio, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Not to mention that today Americans want lengthy campaigns where candidates speak in small venues with people and want to see how the candidates respond to local issues. So why is the election of 1828 so important, you might ask? Well, in order for you to understand this point fully, here is some history on what was going on at the time. First of all, it is important to talk about the election of 1824, where there was only one political party, the Democratic Republicans, and this was called the era of good feeling, because everyone agreed with the party, or so they would have you believe. John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson were also the candidates for the presidency, as well as William Crawford and Henry Clay, but neither of them was able to win the Electoral College majority. So, as the 12th Amendment in the Constitution dictates, the vote went to the House of Representatives, where they struggled to come up with a decision, but ultimately gave the presidency to Adams. This didn't sit well with Jackson and his supporters, who believed that the election had been stolen from him, because although he didn't win the majority he needed to be president, he still won more electoral votes than Adams. Now, Lynn Hudson Parsons calls the 1828 election the birth of modern politics. His reason for that is entirely based on the fact that during this election, campaigns took a more modern turn. The smear campaign from both John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson plagued the newspapers of the day. This election also used something that had never been seen before, which was polling. Andrew Jackson was lucky to have Martin Van Buren on his side, especially when Van Buren made use of his experience with the Bucktails in New York to organize and strategize a plan to rally more voters for their cause. The structure which Van Buren came up with is the basic model for any modern business today, where key positions are delegated to capable people in order to manage a large venue, in this case a campaign. By assigning roles and collecting data on voters, they were able to exploit their findings to their advantage, such as polling, demographic information, ethnic group needs and wants, as well as organizing grassroots movements like the Hickory Clubs to register voters and convince them of the necessity for a Jackson presidency. Now, not to mention that this election was the first election where more people were able to vote thanks to the lift of restrictions of land ownership. Of course, you still had to be white and male in order to vote, but in comparison to the previous election where you could only vote if you were white male and owned lands, this was the most democratic election thus far in American history. Here's also where we start to see the use of catchy slogans like "Vote for Old Hickory" that would remain in people's minds where election time came around. Unfortunately for Adams, his campaign did not follow the same structure that Jackson's campaign did, and his failure was inevitable. Also, to his demise, his popularity and lack of public likability did not help. This is something Jackson was able to accomplish and made the American people of the time believe that he was a candidate of the people. But don't take it from me. I actually interviewed a real historian from the University of Houston who answered a couple of questions. Dr. Alexander V. Marriott of the University of Houston has a doctorate's degree in early American Republic and intellectual political developments. Dr. Marriott has several articles published and is full scholar, but he can also be a cool dude. So here's the interview. I went on and talked to him, and the first question was, why would you say the election of 1828 was consequential? I'm trying to do my PhD voice, so bear with me. Sure, all elections are. The 1828 election was particularly so as the rematch between Andrew Jackson, this time with a massive as a well-organized national party working to see him successful, and John Quincy Adams, the last Secretary of State to the presidency, figures. Jackson's policies were also in significant respect quite different from those pushed by Adams, and the shift put the Republic on a much different course into the thick of the second party system. Well, the second question was, what were the reasons for Adam losing the election? And I'm done with that voice. So, there was a variety of reasons. Adams never had a widespread popular base in the country, having received 30% of the vote in 1824 and having been selected by the House of Representatives. However, unfair it may have been to Adams and Clay, the widespread use of the corrupt bargain troop clearly undercut the credibility of his administration. But I think his defeat boils down to his being out of step with the age in many ways, and not being able to adjust to the growing mass participation that Jackson's party brought to the election of 1828. You can see this in the results of the election. He was really not successful in building much of a national coalition outside of the Northeast. So, question number 3. Why did you think Jackson win? Well, the Battle of New Orleans. Jackson's also elude a candidate has many aspects, but nearly all of them grounded back to his having summarily crushed the British in January 1815. Adams, by comparison, had been instrumental in negotiating the treaty that ended the War of 1812, and that could never match the romantic allure of the victorious General Jackson. Also more resembled the common voter in the United States of 1828 than Adams, who seemed a version of an American aristocrat given his father's career. Aside from all that, Jackson had a party behind him to mobilize excitement and voters on his behalf. This unquestionably made his election certain, as well as the absence of the two other candidates to split major constituents in the South and the West. Question number 4. According to your expertise, do you think Van Buren's involvement influenced Jackson's victory? Without a question, if Jackson provided the aegis of military heroism and common man popularity in the election of 1828, Van Buren organized a party that boosted the aegis to the political dominance in a particular and real sense. Beyond that, Van Buren helped translate Jackson's beliefs about government into a platform that could appeal to wide swathes of the voters outside of the West and the South. He made Jackson's supporters a true national party. Question number 5. How consequential was the media in the election of 1828? Consequential indeed, but only in the sense of being the primary mechanism of getting the message of the party out to the voters far and wide. The press in that period and American history was so obviously partisan and political, so this was basically all it could do or all it wanted to do. This was certainly important, but we should not assume that the media, as it existed in 1828, moved voters in one direction or another. That was not really their mission. Question number 6. How consequential were the Hickory Clubs? By themselves, not very consequential. They were not a case of anything but a consequence. They were the outgrown of the efforts to organize an excitement and motivated party to get Jackson elected. Question number 7. Do you agree with Lynn H. Parsons' argument in his book, The Birth of Modern Politics, that the election of 1828 was the precursor to the political machine that our current political system uses? In some ways, yes. The second party system that began with Van Buren's creation of the Democratic Party and the efforts to elect Jackson in 1828 is, in many ways, still with us. That particularly parties still exist. We still nominate candidates at national party conventions, party platforms. We still have campaign books, campaign slogans, and national party coalitions that work across the country to elect candidates, and we still expect victorious parties to reward these people who work so hard with officers and government posts, etc. In other ways, this is still an unusual political environment from the vintage point of 2016. The candidates did not campaign, did not speak directly to voters about the choice, did not directly attack each other, and the newspapers did not report on this election in any sort of disinterested way and were not expected to do so. The negative campaign was also highly prejudicial and far-fetched in 1828, with some fairly outrageous accusations made against both candidates with only a vague relationship to fact. Question number 8. As a historian, could you tell us how the election of 1828 and its campaign influenced the American modern politics point of view? Well, the election of 1828 does not live on in American memory very well at all. I suspect maybe 1% of people could even name the candidates, let alone the issues that animated the contest. In terms of modern politics, I have already indicated which innovations development during the second party system that are still with us. One thing that the campaign represents that is still critical in American elections from time to time is how hard it is to run against a person that is really popular with an American people, especially a victorious American military hero. That lesson reverberated then and continued throughout American history to the days of General Eisenhower. And there you have it, guys. As Dr. Merritt explained to us how this period was important and how some things that Parsons highlights in his book, according to his expert opinion, are overhyped. It, however, does not refute the fact that without the 1828 election and Martin Van Buren, we would not have today the political machine that we have. So you might be asking yourself, why is this important? Yeah, big deal that Jackson beat Adams by getting a bunch of people to vote for him using tactics the modern politicians use. Well, many Americans today believe that politics are a game where only the rich and powerful get to play, and then the interests of the common American usually gets ignored. precisely because Americans feel that way, this is important. It is important that it is a representative democracy like the United States. The people understand and become informed of how politicians get elected into office. Campaigns are designed to influence people of the candidate's worth at any cost and are oftentimes the main reason why people get blindsided by the poor qualifications that specific candidate have. This is exactly why this project is important, because once this seemingly complex machine is broken down and explained to more common terms, people get to understand what it is and avoid voting against their own interest. And as promised, here at the end of the video, I have proven through several sources that the beginnings of the political campaign traces its origins back to the elections of 1828, illuminating the sources of political progress from the idea that the founding fathers had and how it changed into a machine that targets popular belief as well as meticulously focusing on demographics, ethnicity, financial class, and popularity. This documentary answered the question of how did it all begin, how did it all shape the way Americans elect officials in the 21st century by using the same tactics that Van Buren used in 1828. And thank you.